proves how important a fine record changer can be.
I turned to lumberjack cigarettes.
The IBM Selectric Typewriter.
Imagine being whisked away as a child from the present and back in time to the sizzling 60s when things were a whole lot stranger. From outlandish fashion, equipment, and entertainment choices to bizarre behaviors by literally everyone around you. It's safe to say that kids today wouldn't fit in. Here are 20 things from the 1960s kids today will never understand.
You won't believe your eyes. The snappy new cannons are here.
Film cameras. Taking a walk down memory lane, we'll start with the technology used to capture memories in the 1960s. Film cameras were quite popular and used for personal and commercial use, and when you took pictures, the results were not instant, so you couldn't immediately get a copy, but they used rolls of light-sensitive film. The film was placed inside the camera with precision and had a specific number of shots that could be printed before the film ran out of space, so every click needed to count. One of the interesting parts of film cameras was you couldn't view any of the pictures until the roll was completely exhausted, and then you would take it to a studio for development. The films are converted to nice colorful images, and finally, the unbearable anticipation for the printed shots is rewarded with a batch of ready pictures. With today's mobile phone cameras and digital cameras, the concept of waiting for photos seems absurd to the younger generation, but for those who had once used a film camera, each and every shot was magic, waiting to be unveiled, and the suspense before getting the printed copies made it even more priceless.
Encyclopedia Britannica is the finest home learning program in the world.
Encyclopedias. Here's a scary thought. Google didn't always exist. Whatever did people do without the search engine that knows it all? How did students do their homework? And what references did people have to past information? Encyclopedias were the Google of the 1960s. They were carefully cataloged books that carried well-documented knowledge. The information was arranged in alphabetical order for ease of research, and the weighty books covered an endless amount of data, covering most of the past and the present. Encyclopedias were places of discovery, and you could get lost wandering from page to page in awe. If you were feeling adventurous, you'd place sticky notes, highlights, and bookmarks on the pages that you needed information on at a later time. Today, kids would look at encyclopedias as one would look at a scroll from the early Cenozoic era, but they've always been our most trustworthy guide for all things knowledge-based. Can you guess how people made copies of their documents without a photocopier in the 1960s? Or the most popular kids game of the era? Stick around to find out. Party lines. One of the interesting things in the 1960s was a little communication misadventure called the party line. Now every home had a landline, those phones with wires connecting the receiver and the dial, and unlike today where everyone has a unique phone number, in the 1960s, close neighbors often shared numbers or a line. Imagine being on a call with your date, having a steamy conversation, but unbeknownst to you, your neighbor or someone else in close proximity could pick up their phone and listen in on your conversation. And it gets even more weird. You couldn't make a call until the person in the next room wrapped up their call and dropped the phone. Every call was chaos waiting to happen, and who knows whose dirty laundry would be aired in public next. Party lines are certainly inconvenient when you need privacy. However, they do serve pretty well when you want to have a communal conversation. Of course, kids of the present, with their Android and Apple phones, would never fathom being in such a predicament as to share a line with everyone.
What are you listening to? This Remco transistor radio I made myself.
Transistor radios. During the humble beginnings of entertainment gadgets, there once existed a piece of equipment in the shape of a box. Most people would carry them around as a source of information, education, news, and entertainment. These small boxes were transistor radios. The small radios revolutionized how we receive information. They were portable, so you could take them anywhere, indoors and outdoors. They featured various frequencies you could tune into to get the latest music, news, and even radio programs. The advantage of the transistor radio was that it acted as a companion that kept you company no matter where you went, sometimes even when taking a number 2. The younger generations have video podcasts, live streams, and many fancy visuals, and they could never envisage a life where your closet companion was a tiny radio box that simply surprised you with whatever content it had, without the option of picking the program for yourself. TV shows signing off at late hours. The new age is heavily distracted with shows and live streams that extend through the night until the morning, and this is all well and good, but if you were around in the 1960s, you remember a much simpler time when television broadcasting would close the day and go blank, usually in the evening. No late-night shows after hours. All you got was a colorful placeholder that looked like a wallpaper and would go on until dawn, when it was time to resume the television broadcast day. You may call it a shift, and when it was time to sign off, the national anthem would be played right before the screen faded out. In this modern age, the competitiveness between entertainment providers is so extreme, they scavenge for attention by ensuring the audience is engaged every second of the day. So the idea of TV shows signing off at late hours is unimaginable.
Check out the long line of cars waiting to get in at the Mission Tiki Drive-In Theater.
Drive-In Theater. Here's a scene from the 1960s. A massive projector appears to be showing a movie. Facing this large projection are hundreds of parked cars with people inside. This is the Drive-In Theater, where people come to watch outdoor movies with their families, friends, and dates. Movie night was one of the best forms of entertainment, and there was a bit more freedom and flexibility, better than being cramped in a dark room with strangers like today's movie nights. Imagine snuggling under the stars with loved ones, taking in all the magic and the cool evening breeze, and it didn't matter if it was popcorn, pizza, or mild homemade delicacies. It was always a spectacular evening. The idea of drive-ins today might be bewildering to the young mind, with questions of safety and privacy, but for those who experienced those days, it's nothing short of nostalgic and awe-inspiring. A record player. Music has existed for a long time, and we've used various means to store musical albums, making them accessible for celebrations and all occasions. A record player was a musical player that was popular in the 1960s, long before the cassette, the CD, the hard drive, or any other form of storage device. The vinyl record existed as a masterpiece. The slick record was placed on the turntable and the needle was dropped into position, and once it touched the vinyl, silence fell as anticipation for melody heightened. The vinyl had to be kept safe from dust and casings, and the very ritual of placing it on the record player always had an atmosphere of luxury, sophistication, and vintage authenticity. It was an auditory adventure that stimulated the senses and sent emotions coursing through the audience. It can be said that those who grew up with the record player experienced music far differently from those who only knew CDs and memory cards.
There are several good places in your home where an extension telephone will be of great convenience and comfort.
Rotary phones. Now we go back in time when rotary phones were extremely popular. They were the first generation of phones, made long before the touchscreen, and unlike your touchscreen phone, the rotary required an entire process to even get started. You had to place your finger in the hole bearing the corresponding number and then spin the dial, watching as it slowly returned to its starting position before you could spin the next number. It took even longer if the phone number had a few zeros and nines, and the process required patience and attention to detail, or you might find yourself redialing a few more times. Imagine what it would take to leave 3 missed calls. The rotary phone is a piece of work and does bring back related memories like limited mobility due to its short cord, a piece of equipment that kids may find uncool. Black and white television. Television wasn't always what it is today, and if you were around in the 60s, you'd be familiar with a pioneer of household entertainment, the black and white television. Most households owned a black and white TV, and the gray screens aired the most entertaining shows of the 60s. The monochromatic cathode ray tubes limited the colors to black, white, and gray, and sometime in the 60s, colored screens began to emerge. Despite its inability to show the actual color of things, this technology was wholesome entertainment, and the whole family would gather in front of the screen, fiddling with the antennas to catch up on their favorite sitcom or blockbuster movie. The black and white TV certainly paved the way for future technology and will always be remembered as the first. Phone numbers without a phone. Have you ever wondered why some rotary phones had alphabets assigned to each number? It may come as a surprise, but in the 1960s, phone numbers with named exchanges were exchanges, and they were pretty normal. But what did it mean? Well, simply put, phone numbers at that time didn't start with numbers, they started with names. You'd start with the first two letters of a name followed by a number, which would be very confusing to kids today, especially if you can't remember the name of the person you want to reach. This began in the 1930s, and by the 1960s it was on its way out of trend. Phone numbers consisted of 3 alphabet letters with 4 digits, and the alphabet names didn't only give you a number, they gave you a city and location for the person in question. Due to privacy concerns, name codes had to be switched to the all-number system.
Just as you do in your school. We all know the atomic bomb is very dangerous.
Duck and cover drills. Imagine if your teacher today was to yell duck and cover and then went under her desk for protection. It could get pretty chaotic, or children would probably have a good laugh. The words duck and cover were no joke in the 60s. The duck and cover drills of the 60s were a simple drill that was practiced in every school. It prepared students for the possibility of a nuclear attack. The Cold War was a time of great uncertainty, and everyone was on the edge. It seemed that every passing day brought you closer to imminent danger. Schools were like camps designed for nuclear attack survivors, and when that alarm went off and you heard duck and cover, you dove under your desk, laid low, and braced for impact. The drills and lockdown routines were a huge thing in the 60s as the air got more tense between powerful nations. Children today will never understand the fearful and nerve-wracking experience of a duck and cover drill since we live in a much safer time.
The party. Maybe you remember the old test sentence. Expert typists seldom look at the keyboard.
The typewriter. Many kids today would be unable to identify a typewriter, but imagine taking one of these to school for show and tell. In the 1960s, right before computers were invented, typewriters were the titans of the writing world, and shorthand was a high-paying skill. Typewriters were the fastest means of creating well-scripted documents. You'd hunch over your typewriter, hitting those keys, as the loud clickety-clack forms a rhythm that's almost soothing to the senses. Each key added an inked letter to the white paper, but the typist was expected to be professional because there was no backspace key to correct the errors, so correcting mistakes would be a time-consuming process. The typewriter, now no more than a relic, is a nostalgic memory that children today would only find absurd and provocatively slow.
Our maps. Britain is the world's greatest map-making country, perhaps because we're a seafaring race.
Using printed paper maps for directions. As a child of the 1960s, it wasn't uncommon to watch adults fiddle with a paper map while driving. They'd try to figure out where they were using these maps and what route was best to follow. Using printed paper maps for directions was the only way to get around in an age where Google Maps and GPS were non-existent. People would unfold large printed maps and even write on them occasionally in order to mark places. And to use maps, you needed to know how to read one. So it was a skill that everyone had to have in those analog days. Other services like MapQuest and GPS are useful when combined with checking for landmarks and reading road signs, and these days you don't need to know how to read a map. You simply tap on your screen and get the visual and audio directions from the digital maps.
A very special person at the North Pole would like to hear from you. Why not?
Writing letters as a way of communication. Writing letters as a way of communication was a common practice in the 1960s. It wasn't restricted to the corporate world, but was an informal way of expressing heartfelt emotions to friends, relatives, family, and loved ones. Writing and sending a letter required a paper, writing material, an envelope, and postage stamps. and if the letter was for a loved one, you'd spice the note up with a bit of perfume scent. The time put into letter writing was quite extensive because you had to pick the best words that portrayed your intentions. It cannot be compared to today's digital emails that are quick and easy, with the integration of editor software and AI plugins that ensure your email sounds exactly the way it should. And to top it all off, waiting for a reply to your letter was a nerve-wracking experience because it took so long to deliver and the other person to send their letters in return. The art of letter writing in the 60s helped preserve fond memories and connect with distant friends. Milkman. Back in the 1960s, you get an early morning delivery right to your doorstep. And it wasn't Amazon or FedEx, it was the milkman, delivering fresh and creamy milk from the dairy. This was long before cold aisles and grocery stores, and rather than going to the store when you needed milk, all you had to do was wait for the early morning milk from the milkman. These hard-working, dependable, and friendly milk fairies were always on time, with a hearty smile and your milk of preference. In some cases, it became a personalized friendship. Morning deliveries came with the exchange of pleasantries that often facilitated a conversation. Sadly, the era of the milkman is but a memory in most parts of the world, one that children of the new generation could only imagine.
If you ask Ma Bell, she'll tell you that San Diego County has about 11,000
phone booths or payphones. These small mini booths on the streets are not there by accident. They're called pay booths or payphones, and in the 1960s, mobile phones were not a thing, so people needed to communicate. You simply walked into the phone booth, put some quarters into a slot, and were able to place a call to anyone. You always made sure to have a few quarters with you because you never knew when you'd need to make a call. In some cases, you'd meet a small queue of people waiting to get their turn, and it usually happened in areas that had fewer phones. The mobile phone did bring a lot of convenience and privacy, but the payphone pretty much solved the needs of the people in the 60s, and besides, you didn't have to worry about your battery. Some hints of payphones do still exist today. In some cases, it's only aesthetics inspired by the payphone itself.
And best. That's why Muriel Air Tips drive me mad.
Cigarette advertising on TV. Today, you'd hardly see a single cigarette ad on TV or anywhere else, but in the 1960s, you couldn't watch a show on air without multiple cigarette adverts. Cigarette advertising on TV was extremely common, with different brands trying to convince you of how awesome you'd look with their product in one hand. The prohibition of cigarette ads on TV and radio only came around in the 70s, but during their peak, various brands invested millions in cigarette ads. Billboards, newspapers, magazines, and TV were all used as instruments of propaganda to show that smoking cigarettes improved class and taste, and they were safe. Despite awareness about the harmful effects of smoking, tobacco companies refuted these claims by promoting different forms of filters and avoiding the health implications of their products. The ban on cigarette ads became effective in 1971 after plausible proof was presented of the dangers of cigarettes. Today, non-smoking signs are placed in many areas, especially children-friendly places. Sunday drives as family fun. The 1960s was certainly the good old days, and why wouldn't it be? Gas prices were cheap, families could easily afford mass-produced vehicles, and this paved the way for family fun behind the wheel on Sundays. Many families adopted the ritual of Sunday drives as family fun. Around the city, exploring new sites and routes. The road infrastructure had greatly improved as of the 1960s, and many connecting routes sprang up, running for miles. This made Sunday drives with the family entertaining and made for good bonding sessions with the kids.
When you use a carbon pack, be sure to use smooth carbon.
Carbon paper. Remember carbon paper, the piece of material called carbon paper to make photocopies of documents and writings long before photocopying machines were even a thing? It was easy to use and super convenient. All you needed to do was sandwich your carbon paper between two white sheets of paper, and when you wrote on the paper at the top with a pen, the exact same thing appeared on the bottom sheet. This sorcery was necessary when you needed a copy of whatever document you were creating, and although it also meant that your misspellings and writing errors would appear in the replicated document, it made duplication a whole lot easier given the lack of technology.
Pogo stick. That's right, a newly designed gasoline engine powers the hop rod.
The Pogo stick. In the top spot, we have the magnificent Pogo stick. This toy wasn't only a hit with the kids, teenagers and adults got in on the fun as well. The simple mechanics of the Pogo stick brought joy, laughter, and fun amongst children. Mastering it came with incredible balance, and those who did it were like rock stars. Kids would hop around like bunnies, challenging each other on who had better stamina. It was a beautiful childhood memory that reminds us of the days when kids actually preferred to play outside instead of today's indoor gaming and activities that can be recluse.